Hello, DC fans! Today is going to be my attempt of placing all of the Superman trailer scenes in timeline order. Now, granted, the movie may jump around with flashbacks, etc., and there's just no way to predict that, but these are the order I think from a timeline that the scenes are happening. So, lots to discuss. Let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have a May contest running all month long. Be subscribed and leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. Okay, so we're going to go through each of these groupings of scenes in timeline order. But before we even get to these, we have to talk about the earliest thing in the timeline. That would be this shot of sweet little baby Clark running into Pa Kent's arms. So definitely that is going to be a flashback. And then we're going to get to this scene in a minute. But what I want to show here is, notice, there is a framed newspaper article. And in fact, here it is. I actually have the exclusive on my channel of this because Fox Ate My Sushi sent this to me, worked on set, took a legal picture, and sent it to me so we can actually see what this thing says. So here's what's interesting. The newspaper date seems to align to the year 2021, so this is quite a while in the past, and we see Superman saving a runaway train. So here's a close-up of the picture in the article, and in fact, it looks a lot like that scene from the first Superman, right, where he saved a runaway train. Different way of doing it, but saved a runaway train. Notice, written by Clark Kent, what a surprise, right? And photos by Jimmy Olsen. But the really important things here is Superman is Metropolis's most famous superhero. I am sure that ticks Lex Luthor off. And then also we get a shout out for Lord Tech because some of the people on the train were heading to Lord Tech. So I'm just showing this to say Superman has been around for a while and is very, very famous. All right, so also in this newspaper, down in the bottom half, we see this article that says climate change impacts detailed at Science Center. We're going to see a lot of issues with the weather coming up throughout these trailer scenes. All right, so it's also worth noting, we learn early on that Lois knows who Superman is, so I don't know where to put this particular scene, but I thought it's worth mentioning now where she says, "You have a dog?" And we see him there with Krypto. Also, it's worth noting this mighty Crabjoys, they seem to be showing up everywhere, so we got to see what James Gunn's cooking with that. Keep an eye out for them. And then here we see Superman and Lois sharing a passionate kiss because obviously she knows that Superman is Clark. All right, so now let's get to the main 8 sections. So the first I'm calling Boravia. So that deals with this poor little kid, right, holding up this flag with the Superman symbol on it, even quietly saying Superman, calling out to him. And in fact, we see this news article that gives us some more information. But before we get to it, I got to mention Luthor Corp, right? Good old Lexus company. He's labeled everything. And then GBS News, we've seen that throughout the DCU. This was from Creature Commandos, in fact. But most importantly, we see the news story is saying Boravian troops amassing at border. And in fact, we learn a lot more about this from a second exclusive on my channel. Thank you again, Fox Ate My Sushi, which this newspaper article tells us Boravia has been the source of numerous headlines worldwide in recent weeks as it invaded neighboring country Jarhanpur, which you might recognize that name. We heard that in Creature Commandos when Frankenstein says that Rick Flag, he and I fought together at Jarhanpur several moons ago. So love how it's all tying together so nicely. But okay, we see this conflict is pretty unfair, right? On the left, we have tanks, probably supplied by Luthor, and on the right, just a bunch of people in cars. Not good. Those tanks look very high-tech. But it seems that Superman isn't the only one involved. I mean, that's Guy Gardner swatting people away dismissively with his Green Lantern hand, right? I love that. And he's rocking the same nasty bowl cut that he had in the comics. It's hilarious. But yeah, this means Superman isn't the only one that got involved. In fact, is Mr. Terrific also involved? I mean, first of all, here's what he looked like in the comics versus in the movie. So it looks really cool. And notice the fair play. He had that tattooed on his arms. Now it's just part of his jacket. And then here, of course, are his T-spears. He's one of the most scientifically brilliant people on the planet. But yeah, it looks like he's also getting involved somewhere. So we see these folks that seem to be there to report on the situation when suddenly these dudes in battle armor show up. They're attacking Mr. Terrific, but of course he's using his T-spears to protect him. But what is going on here? Who is in these suits and why are they there? Notice the suits look an awful lot like Luthor's armor that he's worn in the comics. So did he supply this armor? Like, what is going on? So here we see Mr. Terrific just thrashing a bunch of them, which is hilarious. And then I'm wondering if they're on the right, if that's Lois Lane, who would also be there reporting. So yeah, really, really curious what's going on there. So since we mentioned Luthor, I may as well throw in this shot. Not sure where it actually happens in the movie, but notice the engineer is working for Luthor. If we zoom in here, and we're going to see better shots of the engineer down the road, but the engineer, of course, is right out of the comics with nanotech, and it's kind of looking like her whole body might be nanotech, but certainly she can create almost anything from the nanotech. All right, so then maybe this is Superman returning from overseas because we can see him flying through the air, and Luthor turns around and says he's back. All right, so these are all of the scenes that are happening overseas, so I'm grouping them in the section called Boravia. All right, so next is the interview, and I'm placing this before the Hammer of Boravia attacks because Lois doesn't bring that up in the interview, and I would think that would be a really important thing to bring up if it had already happened. So yeah, we've seen this from the trailer. She says, "Are you being serious right now? You would let me interview you as Superman?" He's like, "Yeah, sure." So she turns on her recorder, which notice is Lord Tech. We'll talk a lot more about Lord Tech in a minute. But anyway, she says, "Are you ready?" He says, "Let's do it, Cronkite," referring, of course, to Walter Cronkite. So she says, "Superman." He says, "Miss Lane, you've recently come under a lot of fire. Today, the Secretary of Defense said he's going to look into your actions." And he's like, "My actions? I stopped a war." She's like, "Well, in effect, you illegally entered a country." He's like, "This is how it's going to be?" She's like, "Well, I'm not the one being interviewed, Superman." So yeah, very tense here. But she says, "Did you consult the president?" He says, "No." She says, "Well, you seemingly acted as a representative of the United States. I wasn't representing anybody," he says. And she says, "Well, I would question myself in the same situation and consider the consequences." And he finally just loses it. People were going to die. So what's interesting is I never thought of him as an American. But I guess he lives in America, so he kind of represents America. And of course, his colors represent some of the flag colors. So that's just very interesting stuff. I can't wait to see how James Gunn plays this out throughout the movie. But okay, so I really think this interview is happening before we get to the Hammer of Boravia. Because when this dude shows up, oh man, it gets real, right? So supposedly the nation of Boravia has sent this thing, but it's really suspicious. So there's all these drones out there conveniently recording it. I think these are Luthor's drones. But anyway, this thing is pounding on Superman, and here it knocks him all the way down to the ground. I think that's where this scene is happening. He crashes in the ground. And the reason I'm thinking this is happening before we get to the Kaiju is notice the crowd is actually helpful, right? They reach down, this dude says Superman and helps him up. The crowd seems to be on his side at this point. Keep that in mind. All right, so back up top, we have Miss Tessmacher, Luthor's assistant, taking a selfie. You can see the Hammer out there now using heat vision. It's kind of looking like Ultraman under that suit, right? But anyway, Miss Tessmacher is a character from the original Superman movies, so I think that's really cool. So then we see him blasting across this floor of windows, but notice these boards. So these are the same boards that we saw in another shot for Choco cookies, right? So if we go back to that newspaper article, it tells us everything we need to know. Damages included an ocular laser strike on the well-known Choco's building. Luckily, no employees were injured, says a Choco spokesman, and this will not affect the production of our beloved Choco's cookies. So that's good. At least Martian Manhunter's happy, right? All right, so because the battle with the Hammer of Boravia has now occurred, let's take a look at this newspaper in detail. So the date is Monday, May 19th, which does align with calendar year 2025. It says the Hammer of Boravia creates havoc downtown. Notice it's still a mystery man. They don't know who's under that suit. My guess is Ultraman because of the heat vision. Written by Clark Kent. I'm sure after that interview with Lois, he's like, I'm writing my own story. So notice here, retaliation for Superman's actions. It says Metropolis was targeted by a superpowered mystery man on Sunday. So this is literally just the day before this article is coming out. Also notice that Boravia is basically saying, hey, he's not part of us, okay? He's not an official representative. Don't blame us. Superman is unapologetic. Of course, Clark's writing the article, so of course he would be, right? And then this is interesting. This mentions a new tax being instituted because of the damage caused by superpowered individuals. Crazy, right? That is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Okay, so this shot might be after his battle with the Hammer of Boravia, because notice his outfit is not singed, and that happens when he fights the Kaiju coming up. So the battle with the Hammer was on Sunday, as we saw. Now we've moved to Monday, the very next day, and Clark is heading to work. There's that newspaper, Hammer of Boravia. So then he's heading into the Daily Planet. In fact, here's somebody else reading that newspaper article. The planet looks beautiful. Has to be an awesome place to work, I'm sure. Here he is clowning around with Jimmy Olsen. Yet again, we see that newspaper article. It's too funny. It keeps showing up. And so then finally he's passing Lois. So a couple interesting things to note here. Notice this news story is talking about flooding due to extreme weather. And in fact, back on this news article, there was something talking about 50 tornadoes confirmed during recent outbreaks. So there are just major problems going on with the weather. Also, up here on the screen is Miss Tessmacher, Luthor's assistant again. And Lois is definitely into Clark, right? Even after that terrible interview, she still seems really into him. And finally, we can use this shot to introduce the Daily Planet crew. Obviously, that's Lois up front. Then we have Cat Grant, Jimmy Olsen, Steve Lombard, who's going to be played by Beck Bennett. That's going to be awesome. And, of course, who can forget Ron? So, all right, those are all the things dealing with the Hammer of Boravia and the newspaper story about it. Now, I do think the Kaiju attack is happening later because I think that would have been in the paper if it was on the same day. Likewise, Lois would have mentioned it in the interview. All right, so we see him saving lots of people from the Kaiju. He saves this little girl. I love that scene. He's also saving this lady who's about to get smushed. But before he flies down, we have to point out major floods causing suffering. Yet again, more weather-related issues. And of course, Big Belly Burger. If you've watched anything DC related, you've seen Big Belly Burger. But anyway, he flies down, saves her, which is great, and then is seeming to be pushing back on the Kaiju, maybe to keep it from crushing a building. And then finally here we see Flame On, right, as it is torching him. And then this is interesting. In one of the trailers, while he's getting torched, he instead decides, nope, I'm done with this, and he flies up into the sky, right? But we also saw another trailer where as he's getting torched, he just waits and then has that great line where he says, hey, buddy, eyes up here. So I'm wondering if maybe he gets torched twice. But anyway, this time when he flies up, we get, if we watch real closely, a shot of Lord Tech on the side of the building there and the Maxwell Lord symbol. So yeah, definitely Lord Tech is going to play a big role in the movie. Maxwell Lord, of course, is from the comics. I loved him in the Justice League International run. He was so good in that. And he's going to be played by Sean Gunn. So this is a shot from Peacemaker Season 2's trailer, because they haven't shown him yet in the Superman movie, but I'm sure he'll look very similar to that in Superman. And it looks like Superman might have some help. So it looks like all three of them are working for Maxwell Lord, because that's his logo on their shirts. And in fact, we will see them again in Peacemaker Season 2. This is also from the trailer for that show. Notice there's Hawk Girl on the left and Guy Gardner on the right. And you can see the logo again on their shirts. And then here's a nice action shot of Hawk Girl. I'm assuming she's helping in the battle with the Kaiju. We'll have to wait and find out. So anyway, Superman decides it's time to take this thing out. It looks like he's maybe doing a cannonball there because he's holding his legs in like he would dive in the water. But anyway, here we see him flying in and just ready to absolutely knock this thing out. But first, we got to point out, new regulations set to begin next week. So is that the new tax that we saw in the newspaper article earlier? Not sure. Or are there regulations on superheroes? Interesting. Anyway, so he knocks this thing out and we are done with it. But this is interesting to notice. Okay, so the crowd seem pretty happy, right? They're recording with their phones, they're cheering, but I think all of that changes when this destruction occurs. And I know we're in Metropolis because that sure looks like Luthor Corps, right? You can see the connection between the two different buildings there. But yeah, we have massive destruction as these buildings are collapsing. And here I think we see Superman rising out of the rubble from the destruction. Here you can see a lamp pole there. Yeah, not good at all. And maybe, just maybe, that's also when this destruction is occurring, because I don't know what's happening here. It might be a totally different time, might be because of the Kaiju. You can let me know your thoughts on that. But definitely lots of destruction in this battle. Here you can see the building is falling apart there. That ship on the ground, I'm guessing that must be Luthor's ship, because it's not Mr. Terrific's ship. But yeah, Superman is no longer everybody's favorite. They're now recording him to mock him, right? They're throwing stuff at him. He heads into the building here to basically get away from everybody. And then you can tell he's just totally depressed about how this all went down. Up above, you can see Stag Industries. That's a nice Easter egg that we're going to see Metamorpho before long. And then Guy Gardner, because remember, they were helping him. Guy Gardner then seals off the building. You saw Hawk Girl with him. And of course, back here is Mr. Terrific. So yeah, that did not go well. Not go well at all. So speaking of Hawk Girl, I'm just going to throw this in because I don't know where else to put it. We have this stained glass window crashing, and out of it comes Hawk Girl holding someone. Now, I think they are intentionally blurring this person's head so we can't see who it is. If you can figure out who that is, let me know. But anyway, where are they? I mean, this does not look like Metropolis, let alone even America. But yeah, Hawk Girl is definitely kicking some butt. I can't wait to see her in action in the movie. Then I think maybe this is when he goes home to get some parental TLC from Ma and Pa Kent, because they're helping him in bed there. And notice his outfit looks kind of charred, maybe from the Kaiju. I'm just not sure. Lois is there as well. But his mother even says, I cleaned your boots. I'll go get them for you, which is so sweet. And then notice the shirt he's wearing. That's the same shirt we're going to see in a second as Pa Kent is telling him your actions. That's what makes you who you are. So I think he's encouraging him after, everybody turned on him, with the Kaiju. But notice there's Clark's wearing the same shirt and basically reaches in to hug him, which is so sweet. So there we go. I think those are all the things tied to Kaiju attack. All right. So now at some point, we're going to move to this scene I'm calling home. So something happens to Superman. I mean, he is clearly severely beaten because that's him falling through the sky and landing in a big boom on the ground. And obviously, we see him seriously injured. Now, notice his outfit doesn't seem to be singed from the Kaiju. So I don't know. Maybe Ultraman gave him this beatdown. Let me know your thoughts. But anyway, he whistles. And of course, along comes good old Krypto to help him out. But first, jumps on him, which causes severe pain. So obviously, he is very, very badly injured. But then he says, home. And Krypto realizes, okay, I guess I got to be a good boy. So he reaches out, grabs his cape, and drags him home. Of course, home is the Fortress of Solitude, which comes rising up out of the ground. Krypto takes him right up to the door, and he actually barks, but I don't know that the bark is what opens the door. I think it's probably Superman's DNA. We'll talk more about that in a minute, because that's really important. But anyway, Krypto drags him in, and the Kryptonian robots come to help out. And indeed, while they're picking him up, notice we see Jor-El and Lara whispering. So I think that is really important because this is how Lex Luthor is going to learn a lot of Superman's secrets. But we'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, they pick him up. He says, thank you. And they say, oh, no need to thank us, sir, as we will not appreciate it. We have no consciousness whatsoever. We are merely automatrons here to serve. And he's like closing his eyes going, please just get me on the table. So anyway, they put him on the table here. And we learn a lot about his anatomy. He's very humanoid. He has bones, bladder, kidney, large intestine, and lungs, all of which are damaged. So they say, with a healthy dose of yellow sun, we'll have you up and at him in no time. Thank goodness the sun is out. That would be bad if it wasn't. And then they say we need 292 times the Heron Prime. So they're basically using this thing like a magnifying glass to give him a big old healthy dose of the sun. And of course, he's screaming because his internal organs are being healed. It's got to be painful. Okay, so what I'm trying to decide is he still at the Fortress of Solitude, maybe in a different room, or has he left? Because Lex and company now arrive. All right, so on his left is the engineer. We'll see more of her in a second. And on his right is Ultraman. So we don't know who's under that mask, but he could be Ultraman from the comics. He could be Bizarro Superman. He could even be a clone of Superman. And of course, if he's a clone, that means his DNA would let them get into the Fortress of Solitude. So sure enough, we see the engineer showing up here, and notice there's that same operating table that they used for Superman, and he's not there. So either, again, he's gone or he's in another room. But yeah, the engineer lets loose, just starts thrashing the poor Kryptonian robots, right? Destroying them left and right, slashing this one in half. Krypto is not happy, so Krypto is still there. That's interesting. And just thrashes her. Of course, over there on the far left, that's Miss Tessmacher. And notice that her face seems to be made of nanites, like her whole body, maybe? That is fascinating. But anyway, Lex is not bothered by any of it. He is very happy to check all of this out. Notice he says Superman. So I think he is listening to some of those audio files from Jor-El, or maybe he's looking up more information, but he is learning all of Superman's secrets. He says he's not a man, he's an it that's somehow become the focal point of the entire world's conversation. Yeah, he is ticked about Superman being famous. He says, I will not accept that. So yeah, he has a lot of information right now, including probably about kryptonite. So eventually, Superman is going to come back, and he's going to see that Kellex, one of his favorite robots, has died. This is him from the comics. So yeah, he is not happy. All right, so that's the section I'm calling home. Now, Ballpark Battle, I am so torn on whether this is the big boss finale or whether this is leading up to his arrest. Anyway, I do believe after everything that happened there at the Fortress of Solitude that he throws this desk, that's Superman on the right and Lex sitting there on the left. Of course, he throws the desk against the wall. Here's a new promo shot they just released, and he's standing over Lex, and he is not happy, and Lex is just sipping his coffee. So I think this is Superman being furious that he knows Lex has invaded his fortress. So I think Lex is now working with the government, in particular Rick Flag Sr., played by Frank Grillo. Of course, we last saw him in Creature Commandos, and he's definitely dyed his hair since then. But I'm also wondering, has Mr. Terrific joined with Superman? Because not only do we see him here hanging out with Krypto, I love that scene, but we're going to see that maybe he's teamed up with Superman to fight, well, Ultraman and also the Engineer. Because here on the ground we see Mr. Terrific. So was he fighting against Superman or with Superman? Really interesting. Anyway, so Superman's having to dodge the nanotech here, and then of course Ultraman comes in and just nails him across the entire baseball field here. Superman tries to stop, but it's really hard to stop that dude. And then here we see the nanotech going after him. So ultimately, I think they do capture him. And then we now see him being arrested. So the reason I'm thinking that Mr. Terrific was fighting with Superman is, notice, Mr. Terrific isn't here because now we see Rick Flag joining up with Ultraman and the engineer as they take Superman into custody. So my guess is he's going to be taken into custody and ultimately handed over to Lex Luthor, which leads us to the last piece, which is the big escape. So I'm wondering if this is maybe the third act or if there's even something that happens after this. But for sure, we're going to see him now in prison along with Metamorpho. Of course, Metamorpho from the comics can change into pretty much any element, right? In fact, I think one of those key elements is kryptonite. So here Metamorpho is literally turning his hand into kryptonite, which is something I'm betting Lex learned about when he broke into the Fortress of Solitude. So now they're just nailing Superman. I mean, he has no powers at this point. So yeah, they just knock him out basically. And notice they're in some type of really bizarre prison. Look at all those prison cells. So James Gunn has talked a lot about pocket dimensions. We saw them in the Peacemaker Season 1. This is the closet his dad had that, of course, when you went inside, it was, well, a lot bigger than a closet. So is Lex Luthor inside some type of pocket dimension where he's holding people prisoner? And by the way, what is this white thing? Does anybody have any idea what's going on there? But notice his suit that he's wearing. Looks like it's the same suit he's wearing here when he's got his gun. He's got that hilarious expression on his face. Now, ultimately, I'm wondering if Metamorpho may be helping. Maybe he actually turns into effectively sunlight as an element. Can he do that? And if so, that would repower up Superman. You can see all these other people in the prison cells next to him so that Superman can now finally escape out of these cells. And it does look like Mr. Terrific is in there trying to help him. See, I really think they're working together, and there's Lois with him. And then Superman now goes maybe into this final boss fight against, I'm guessing once again, Ultraman. So let me know your thoughts. Is this the final boss fight, or do you think there's something else that happens? Either way, Lex Luthor is not happy. So there you go. This is my best attempt at putting together these 8 main groupings for the trailer and trying to put them in order. Let me know if you think I've got things out of order, if you would put different scenes in different groupings, etc. Tried my best. This is tricky. James Gunn makes it really tricky, and I like that. I like that he keeps it mysterious. Then I'm going to end with this scene. I don't know if this is really at the end of the movie, although it would be a really great way to end. If basically, Superman and Lois are like, somebody else can take care of that, right? It's probably Solaris. That's my guess at least. But hey, let Guy Gardner take care of it. Let the Justice Gang take care of it. We're spending the night together and ignoring everything else. So yeah, I think that's a really cool way to end. All right, so July cannot come soon enough, right? This movie is going to be incredible. All right, give me your feedback. Let me know your thoughts. I love to read and respond to everything. Also, don't forget, make contests, be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And we have the membership option in case you're interested in that. And then I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the DC section. Well, talking about this trailer breakdown. It was really fun brainstorming with folks, trying to come up with the best order. Also, in case you're interested in Marvel content, for every day listed here at 7 p.m., we have watch parties leading up to Doomsday's release, May 1st of 2026. So we have 2,200 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join us. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all eagerly await the release of Superman.